My name is Amelia Cross, and I am 29 years old. When I look back at my wedding day, it feels like a dream wrapped in lace and sunlight. The laughter of friends and family filled the air, photographs froze our smiles in timeless frames, and every word spoken carried the weight of promises. I believed with all my heart that this was the beginning of forever. The first night after the wedding, I thought I knew what awaited me. Soft touches, whispered secrets, the intimacy of two lives finally woven into one. But instead, there was distance. My husband rolled away, muttering about exhaustion, and I convinced myself it was nothing. One night of tiredness meant nothing against a lifetime of love, or so I thought. The second night was the same. The third, no different. At first, I told myself marriage needed patience, that love sometimes required silence, that maybe he just needed time to adjust. But as the days blurred into weeks, my patience began to curdle into doubt. Every evening became a ritual of rejection. I would reach for him, hoping for warmth, hoping for reassurance, and each time he turned from me, sometimes with the excuse of work, sometimes with a claim of being unwell, and sometimes without words at all, just scrolling endlessly on his phone until the blue glow of the screen faded into his shallow breaths of sleep. It wasn't just the absence of intimacy. It was the absence of acknowledgement, of love, of partnership. I was a wife in name, but a stranger in my own bed. By the 10th night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had misread everything. Was this truly marriage? By the 20th, I felt a hollow ache growing inside me, not just in my body, but in my spirit. I still cooked, I still smiled in front of others, but when the doors closed and the world grew quiet, I was reminded that I was alone, even while sharing the same roof with the man I had promised forever to. On the 30th night, something inside me broke. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding, my voice trembling, but steady enough to carry the weight of all those sleepless nights. "We've been married a month," I whispered. "You haven't touched me once. Not a kiss, not a caress. What's going on?" I expected hesitation, maybe a tear, maybe some hidden pain he had been holding back, but what I got instead was a dagger. He didn't even look up from his phone. His voice was cold, clipped, cruelly dismissive. "My body, my choice. You have no right." The words sliced through me, clean and merciless. I stared at him, waiting for some sign that it was a joke, or that he'd soften, that he'd realize what he had just said to the woman who wore his ring. But there was nothing. His eyes remained flat, indifferent, as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience beside him. That night, as he drifted off without a care, I sat upright, staring at the ceiling with tears burning my eyes. My chest felt like it was splitting open, not because of the rejection itself, but because of what it meant. He hadn't just denied me intimacy. He had denied me respect, denied me partnership, denied me the marriage we had promised each other in front of God and family. I turned those words over in my mind until dawn. My body, my choice. You have no right. They weren't words of boundaries or self-protection. They were words of possession, of power. He wasn't keeping me out because he was afraid or hurting. He was keeping me out because he had never intended to let me in. And as the sun rose, painting the walls with pale light, I knew the truth with a clarity that left me trembling. This wasn't marriage. This was betrayal wearing a wedding band. I could either keep drowning in the silence he forced on me, or I could choose something else. Something terrifying, but necessary. That morning, as he left the house without a word, I sat alone with a pen and a notepad. My hands shook, but my resolve did not. I wrote the first words of a decision that would change everything. I will go to court. Not to fight for his affection, not to beg for scraps of love, but to dissolve this marriage before it became my prison. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have possibly foreseen, was that this choice, born out of heartbreak, would unravel secrets far darker than cold nights and loveless silence. Secrets of greed, deception, and revenge that would shake the very foundation of the life I thought I had built. And when those secrets came to light, it wouldn't just be about me. It would be about him, his lies, his schemes, his downfall. But on that 30th night, all I knew was that the woman I had been, the one filled with hope and naivety, died with his words. And in her place, a different woman began to rise. A woman ready for the storm to come. The courthouse smelled like paper left too long in sunlight. Dry, a little brittle, as if every file in every drawer held a life that had cracked along its edges. I walked its corridor as if it were a bridge between two worlds, the one where I'd learned to swallow silence and the one where I refused to. The marble floor magnified every step. My heels sounded steadier than my pulse felt. I had rehearsed nothing. Scripts belonged to ceremonies and lies. All I brought with me was the truth, and a manila folder pressed flat against my ribs like a second sternum. My lawyer, a quiet woman named Patel with neat handwriting and eyes that scanned for exits, paced beside me. "You speak if spoken to," she said softly, "and only the facts, Amelia." I nodded. Facts, as if facts had ever protected me. Still, today they were armor. He arrived late, of course. My husband, ex-husband in spirit, if not yet in ink, swept through the double doors 10 minutes past the hour, trailed by a lawyer with a haircut sharp enough to draw blood. He wore a navy suit that fit like calculation and a smile that asked the room to applaud. He did not look at me. He aimed all of his attention at our audience, judge, clerk, court reporter, as if marriage were just another performance for a panel that mattered more than the person living with you. We were sworn in, the oath tasting like iron on my tongue. The judge, a man with gray hair clipped close and a patience that seemed older than the wood paneling, glanced over our file. "Dissolution petition filed after 30 days of marriage," he read. "Expedited hearing granted on the basis of alleged bad faith." His eyes lifted. "Ms. Cross, you initiated. You'll have your say. But first, counsel for the respondent." He meant my husband. His lawyer stood first, smooth as oil on water. "Your Honor," he began, "what we have here is a case of impatience masquerading as injury. Marriage is an adjustment. My client's wife," he gestured toward me with the delicate courtesy one uses to point at an exhibit, "was quick to dramatize normal growing pains. She demanded physical intimacy on a schedule, took offense when he expressed fatigue, and has now weaponized that disappointment into a rush to terminate a union barely begun. We ask that the court consider the petitioner's volatility and control issues as mitigating context." As if on cue, my husband folded his hands with an expression the jury of future gossip would certainly find noble. He looked like restraint itself, jaw relaxed, shoulders square, eyes downcast, just enough to play humble. He had perfected the performance that made strangers believe he was soft-spoken and sensible. What I knew, and what this room would soon learn, was that the quiet he cultivated was not softness, it was surveillance. "Ms. Cross," the judge said, turning to me. It sounded like an invitation and a warning. I rose. The courtroom bench creaked, a small animal shifting in its sleep. "I entered this marriage in good faith," I said. Every word wrapped in breath I had counted to 5 before releasing. For 30 nights, I was denied not just intimacy, but recognition. No hand held, no conversation after the lights went out, no acknowledgement that I was his partner. When I finally asked what was happening, my husband told me, "My body, my choice. You have no right." I let the sentence hang in the room long enough for the fluorescent lighting to hum louder. This isn't a dispute about desire. It's a dispute about respect, about whether a person can enter a marriage with the intent to exclude the other from the bond they vowed to share. A brief stir patted through the gallery, coats shifting, a cough stifled, a pen clattering. The judge's eyebrows came together with a measured gravity. "And you see this as evidence of bad faith, Phil?" he asked. "I see it as the surface," I answered. "I also have reason to believe he never intended a marriage in any meaningful sense, that his motives were financial, opportunistic, and documented." My fingers pressed the folder, felt the rectangular bones inside. Screenshots, dates, strings of words that had seemed like smoke until I learned they could burn. His lawyer exhaled a small laugh that aimed to be disarming. "Your Honor, we object to insinuations of documented motives without foundation. The petitioner is clearly emotional." "I am emotional," I said before the judge could rule, "because I was lied to." Then I closed my mouth as if I had just set down a glass of water and would not touch it again. Judge Carruthers tilted his head, reading the air between us. "We'll get to documentation," he said neutrally. "For now, let's stick to sworn testimony." He turned to my husband. "Mr. Hale, The name, his name, Hale, crossed the room like a shadow sliding across a photograph. He stood, smoothing his sleeves, and crafted a sigh that sounded like a man trying to be patient with life. "Your Honor," he began, "I love my wife. I still do. But we had disagreements about timing. I asked for space, reasonable space, after the wedding. She took that as rejection. I never used the phrase she's quoting in the way she implies. I may have said I have autonomy over my body, as anyone would, but I did not intend to hurt her. She escalates. She threatens. She's asked me to open every financial account and combine assets immediately, and when I said we should wait, this," he gestured to the room, "is what happened." He was shifting the furniture in the room with words, trying to convince everyone that the doorway had always been on a different wall. My lawyer squeezed my elbow under the table, a pressure that said, "Let him move the furniture. We will set it back." "Ms. Cross," the judge said, "did you demand combined finances?" His voice was gentle enough to be mistaken for indulgence, but the question had edges. "No," I said, keeping my face still. "In fact, I asked for a prenup review after the wedding paperwork. I asked to slow down any financial entanglement until we had built trust. He resisted transparency. He resisted intimacy. He resisted honesty. But he did not resist spending, not with my name on reservations." The last sentence escaped sharper than intended. I caught it in my palm and held it there. "Counsel?" the judge prompted. Patel rose, voice level. "Your Honor, the petitioner is prepared to submit communications that speak to motive and intent. We can lay foundation for authenticity, chain of custody, and context. For the sake of time, we request that the court allow us to present a proffer and set evidentiary review for this afternoon." His lawyer straightened, mouth already tensing into objection. The judge raised a finger, one at a time. "Your Honor," his counsel said, "if the petitioner is relying on out-of-context banter or doctored screenshots, we object to any reference prior to authentication." "We are not relying on banter," Patel replied, unmoved. "We are relying on the respondent's own words, time-stamped and preserved from his cloud backups, obtained with consent to access the shared device." The air changed. Even the second hand on the wall clock seemed to reconsider its next step. My husband's face flickered. Not a collapse, just a tremor in the surface tension, the look of a lake when a fish breaks it for an instant and is gone. "Approach," the judge said. At the bench, voices softened to a confidential register, but the courtroom heard the shape of it. Admission of exhibits, parameters for review, the choreography of process. When we returned to our tables, the judge adjusted his glasses and addressed the room. "The court will receive petitioner's proffer for in-camera review. We'll recess for 40 minutes. Upon return, we will determine admissibility." A recess is a misnamed thing. No one rests. The hallway filled with the metallic rustle of nerves. I stood by a window and watched the slow parade of a city that had no idea I was trying to unspool my life without snapping it. Patel did not speak. She let me keep my silence like a coin I could rub smooth. Across the corridor, my husband leaned into his lawyer, lips tight, hands moving. He looked, for the first time since he'd walked in, like a man doing math and not liking the sum. When we reconvened, the judge's expression had changed by a degree you could only measure if you'd spent months studying the distance between indifference and concern. "Back on the record," he said. "The petitioner's proffer includes communications that, on their face, appear relevant to motive." He turned to my husband. "Mr. Hale, your counsel will have an opportunity to challenge authenticity and context. For now, I'm admitting the exhibits provisionally, subject to your objections, because the probative value is significant." His lawyer began, "Your Honor, you'll preserve the record with your objections as we proceed," the judge cut in, not unkindly. He faced me. "Ms. Cross, your counsel may present." Patel did not stride. She simply stood and changed the temperature of the space by the way she handled paper. "Exhibit A," she said, offering the clerk a stack. A group chat titled Founders Night, in which the respondent writes, quote, her eyes stayed on the page, not the room, security first, sentiment later. She'll chill out once accounts merge. Time-stamped the week after the wedding. A sound like a dress ripping traveled through the benches, small, sharp, quickly swallowed. Exhibit B, Patel continued, a text to a friend. 30 days of ice keeps a wife pliable. Afterwards, we negotiate. And Exhibit C. Objection, his lawyer broke in, voice up a register. Context, Your Honor. Locker room exaggeration at best, sarcasm at worst. Noted, the judge said. His gaze, when it landed on my husband, did not accuse. It required. We'll hear the rest. Patel's tone never wavered. Exhibit C, a saved note in the respondent's cloud titled Q3 Targets. Under the subheading Personal, a bullet point reads, Leverage marriage to stabilize optics for Series B. Combine assets post-quarter. Keep access separate until she stops asking questions. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is where sound goes to decide what it will become. In that silence, the judge's jaw set. The clerk touched the stapled corner of Exhibit C as if testing whether it was hot. My husband's hand lifted, then fell, as if he had reached for a story that wasn't there. We did not empty the folder. We didn't need to. Not yet. The judge marked the exhibits, lips thinned. We will break for lunch, he said finally, voice even. We reconvene at 2. Counsel, be prepared to address authenticity line by line. Ms. Cross, Mr. Hale, you are instructed not to contact each other during recess. The gavel tapped, not hammered. As the room exhaled, I gathered what remained in the manila folder. There was more. There was always more. Not just the words he'd sent with a confidence that now looked like hubris, but something hidden in the papers we'd signed, the paperwork he'd hurried, the addendum most brides would have framed as a keepsake rather than read as a blueprint. That card I kept face down for now. In the corridor, he finally met my eyes. For a heartbeat, I saw the boyish charm he sold the world, the soft smile that said he'd never hurt a thing. Then the smile vanished, and what stared back at me was the calculation stripped of its manners. He looked away first. Inside my chest, the old ache reached for me and missed. Where it used to live, something quieter had taken root. Not triumph, not yet. Just the knowledge that truth, once spoken aloud, doesn't go back to sleep. At 2 o'clock, the clock would start again. At 2 o'clock, words would turn to evidence and evidence to judgment. And somewhere beyond the next hour, the trap he'd set for me would reveal its hinge. When the bailiff called us back into the courtroom, the air felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just sharpened. Every cough, every shuffle of papers, every squeak of a chair seemed louder than it should have been, as though the room itself wanted to remind us all that truth, once spoken, demanded attention. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, the manila folder now empty, its contents in the judge's possession. My husband, Hale, leaned forward at the table across from me, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear. The smug curve of his lips was gone. In its place lingered something between irritation and fear. Judge Carruthers adjusted his glasses, a ritual he performed whenever he prepared to anchor the room in gravity. This court, he began, has reviewed the submitted communications. We will now read portions into the record. He cleared his throat and read aloud, his voice flat and steady, designed to strip words of drama, but unable to strip them of meaning. Exhibit A. Don't worry, man. She'll stop asking questions once I merge the accounts. That's when it pays off. A collective gasp moved through the benches like a wave. Somewhere in the back row, a woman muttered something under her breath and was promptly hushed. Hale's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. Informal banter, clearly exaggerated for humor. Overruled, the judge cut in, eyes still on the page. These are the respondent's own words. The silence that followed was thick. I could feel eyes on me from all directions, pity from some, curiosity from others. But I wasn't here for their sympathy. I was here for truth. The judge turned to the next sheet. Exhibit B. 30 days of denial is strategy. Keep her desperate, pliable, easier to negotiate finances later. Marriage is business first. The words struck harder spoken aloud than they ever had when I first read them on the screen. I remembered sitting at my desk that night, scrolling through his messages, my hands trembling as though I had just unearthed something radioactive. I had known then, but hearing them read now, under oath, before the eyes of strangers, it was as if his betrayal had been carved in stone. The courtroom reacted again, this time with sharper whispers. Even Hale's own lawyer shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his tie and avoiding the judge's gaze. Hale finally broke his silence, his voice tight. Your Honor, those were private conversations, taken out of context. The judge's gavel tapped once. Enough. These words, in context or not, show intent. This court will treat them as evidence of bad faith. His eyes, cool and deliberate, moved toward me. Ms. Cross, do you have anything further to add at this stage? I rose slowly, meeting the judge's gaze before turning toward the courtroom. My voice was calm, but each syllable carried the weight of 30 sleepless nights. I believed I was entering a marriage built on love, on trust, on partnership. Instead, what I walked into was a transaction. He wasn't my husband. He was an opportunist who wore a ring as camouflage. And these words, I gestured to the stack of evidence, prove it. For the first time since our vows, Hale's mask cracked. His face drained of its composure, his jaw tight as he muttered something to his lawyer. The audience watched him, not me now. The man who had once painted himself as calm and stable, now twitching at the edges. Patel, my lawyer, stood beside me. Your Honor, this is not about intimacy alone. This is about intent. The respondent entered this marriage with full knowledge he would not act as a partner. He weaponized distance to destabilize my client and prepared financial maneuvers to benefit himself. The judge leaned back, studying Hale as though he were a puzzle with missing pieces. Mr. Hale, what say you? Hale stood, his smile brittle. Your Honor, I admit the language was poorly chosen. But those messages were never serious. Just bravado. Everyone exaggerates with friends. It doesn't mean I intended to harm my wife. His denial rang hollow, echoing in a room already saturated with proof. Even his lawyer looked pained as he sat back down, lips pressed tight. The judge spoke again, his voice slow, deliberate, final. This court finds that there is credible evidence to suggest the respondent engaged in this marriage under false pretenses. The matter of financial intent will be weighed heavily in further proceedings. I sat, my heart steady for the first time in weeks, but I knew we weren't done, because the screenshots were only the beginning. There was one more card I had not played. Something buried in the wedding paperwork he had shoved under my pen, convinced I wouldn't read, convinced no one would notice. And when that card was revealed, it wouldn't just wound his pride, it would end his schemes entirely. The courtroom was already heavy with whispers, but I wasn't finished. The evidence of his messages had cracked open the surface of his lies. Now it was time to expose the foundation beneath them, the part he never thought I would find. I rose to my feet, my palms flat against the table, my voice calm but resolute. Your Honor, before we proceed further, I have one more exhibit to present. Something that predates these messages, something from the very beginning. Patel, my lawyer, reached into her briefcase and pulled out a slim stack of papers, neatly clipped together. She slid them across to the bailiff, who carried them to the judge. It wasn't a screenshot this time. It wasn't gossip from group chats or bravado typed into phones. It was something far more binding, something he had signed with his own hand. The marriage contract addendum, Patel explained, her voice clear, signed by both parties before the ceremony, at the insistence of the respondent and drafted by his legal counsel. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the pages with a frown that deepened as he read. And what specifically should the court note here? Patel's finger tapped the bottom of the page. Section 4, Clause 9. It states in unambiguous terms that if this marriage is dissolved on the grounds of fraud, deception, or bad faith, the respondent forfeits all claims to joint property and must return any financial gifts or support received during the marriage. The judge's eyes flicked up, sharp now, cutting across the room to where Hale sat frozen. Mr. Hale, is this your signature? For a moment, he said nothing. Then his lawyer leaned in, whispering furiously, and Hale nodded once, reluctantly. Yes, Your Honor, but she didn't know what she was signing. It was routine paperwork, formality. I couldn't help it. A bitter laugh slipped past my lips, startling even me. Routine? My voice rose, not in hysteria, but in clarity. You shoved those papers under my pen 2 days before the wedding, telling me it was just another requirement. You wanted me to skim and sign without question. But I read it. And then I had it reviewed by an independent attorney. I knew exactly what it meant. The only person who underestimated that contract was you. The judge's gavel tapped once, silencing the murmurs swelling through the gallery. He read the clause again, slower this time. as if savoring every word that was about to change the course of this trial. Fraud, deception, or bad faith, he repeated. Then he set the papers down and looked squarely at Hale. Mr. Hale, based on the exhibits presented, your own written messages combined with this addendum, it appears you not only entered this marriage with deceptive intent, but you also laid the groundwork for your own forfeiture. Hale's face turned ashen, his composure shattering into something raw, desperate. No, this isn't fair. She tricked me. She trapped me. This was her plan, not mine. The words tumbled out too quickly, too sharp. The courtroom gasped again. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. The confident man in the expensive suit was gone. In his place was someone scrambling, cornered, clawing at excuses. The judge's voice cut through his protests like steel. Enough. You insisted on this addendum. You signed it. You cannot now claim entrapment when the clause you engineered has turned against you. The gavel struck, sharp, final. This court finds that the respondent has acted in bad faith. The addendum is enforceable. All financial claims by the respondent are hereby forfeited, effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment, all I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat. Then the sound of Hale's chair scraping violently backward as he leapt to his feet, his voice breaking. No, you can't do this. This isn't justice. It's revenge. The bailiff stepped forward, firm but calm. Sir, you need to sit down. But Hale wasn't listening anymore. He was unraveling, right there in front of everyone. The courtroom that had once been his stage had become his cage, and the bars were of his own making. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply sat there, letting the weight of it sink in. Because this wasn't just about dissolving a marriage. This was about exposing truth, about reclaiming dignity. And as Hale shouted into the void, I realized something profound. He hadn't just signed a contract with me. He had signed a contract with his own arrogance. And arrogance always comes due. The courtroom verdict should have been enough. It stripped Hale of everything he thought he could claim from me: property, security, the financial safety net he had schemed to secure. But fate wasn't done with him. The law had only been the beginning. The world outside the courthouse had its own way of dealing justice. Word spread quickly, faster than either of us could have predicted. Court documents, once sealed by procedure, became whispers in social circles, passed hand to hand like forbidden fruit. Screenshots of his messages, 30 days of denial keeps a wife pliable, circulated in group chats. His so-called friends, the same men he had once boasted to, now replayed his arrogance as a punchline. He thought marriage was a business model, one text read, but he forgot the market always crashes. I wasn't there to see it, but I heard enough from others to know. The smug confidence he'd worn into the courtroom had followed him out, only to rot under the sun of public opinion. At family gatherings, his relatives, once proud to parade his marriage as proof of success, lowered their voices whenever his name was mentioned. His mother, a woman who once called me the lucky one, now kept her distance even from me, as if guilt by association clung to her son's disgrace. His uncle, according to a cousin who couldn't resist repeating the story, slammed his fist on the dinner table and shouted, "Do you realize the shame you've brought on us?" Shame has a way of staining everyone it touches, and Hale, who had once weaponized reputation to make himself untouchable, now found himself radioactive. His professional life fared no better. He worked at a mid-sized tech firm, one that valued image as much as output. When news of the courtroom evidence leaked, colleagues no longer saw him as clever or strategic. They saw him as manipulative, dangerous, a liability. Clients withdrew their accounts quietly but decisively. Promotions he had bragged about chasing evaporated before he could even ask. While no one could fire him for his marriage scandal alone, no one wanted him attached to their projects either. Whispers in corridors replaced handshakes. Meetings that once included his voice now carried on without him. I remember overhearing one colleague describe it with biting clarity. He built his career on controlling narratives. Now the narrative controls him. The irony was cruel and yet strangely fitting. Because for all those nights he had rejected me, insisting it was his body, his choice, the truth was this. The real choice had never been his. The law made its choice. His friends made theirs. His family, his workplace, even strangers on the internet, they all chose to turn their backs. And me? I chose silence. I didn't need to add to his ruin. He was unraveling just fine on his own. Still, there were nights when I lay awake in my apartment, listening to the distant hum of the city, and wondered how it had come to this. Once, I had wanted nothing more than a marriage filled with laughter, trust, and intimacy. Instead, I found myself watching the man I married collapse under the weight of his own deceit. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, it was clarity. He had schemed for security and ended with nothing. He had planned to control, but lost control of everything, and the world, with its ruthless memory, would not let him forget. Months passed. Hale withdrew further into himself, avoiding public spaces, dodging calls, leaving messages unread. The man who once flaunted his confidence at every dinner table now lived in the shadow of his own reputation. And yet, I sensed something unfinished, something inevitable, because humiliation may strip a man of his armor, but desperation makes him dangerous. I knew sooner or later he would come back, not with arrogance this time, but with pleading. Not as the man who once dismissed me, but as the shell of someone who finally realized what he had lost. And when that day came, I would be ready. Months passed. The storm that had consumed my marriage drifted into silence, but its wreckage remained. Hale no longer appeared in the places where he once held court. His name faded from conversations, replaced with a shrug, a smirk, or silence. I thought I had seen the last of him, until one evening, in a restaurant I often visited for business dinners, fate placed him in front of me once more. I had come in with colleagues, expecting nothing more than a quiet meal, but there he was, sitting alone at a corner table. His suit was rumpled, his hair unkempt, his phone silent beside him. The man who once thrived on attention now looked like a ghost, haunting the life he thought he had mastered. Our eyes met across the room. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. The arrogance, the sharp composure, the endless performance, gone. What was left was a hollow man, a shell carved out by his own choices. He stood abruptly, as if pulled by something beyond control, and crossed the room toward me. My colleagues, sensing tension, quietly excused themselves, leaving us face to face. "Amelia," he said, his voice low, cracked, almost pleading. "Please, can we talk, just for a minute?" I studied him, the trembling hands, the desperate eyes. He was a far cry from the man who had once dismissed me with my body, my choice. This was no performance. This was collapse. Tears welled in his eyes, rolling down his cheeks unchecked. He reached out as if to take my hand, but stopped short when he saw how still I remained. For a heartbeat, I felt the ache of what might have been. The woman who once lay awake, night after night, waiting for love to arrive, recognized the ruin standing before her. But pity and love are not the same. I placed my napkin gently on the table, met his eyes, and spoke calmly. "You told me once, my body, my choice. You have no right." I paused, letting the words land. "You were correct. You made your choice. And now you're living with it." His lips quivered, but no words came. He stood there, broken, watching as the final thread snapped between us. I rose, stepped past him, and walked out of the restaurant. Not with anger, not with triumph, with clarity. Because in the end, this was never about revenge, it was about freedom. Hale had wanted a marriage of convenience, a life built on manipulation and control. But he underestimated the one truth he couldn't escape. Real power lies not in deceit, but in integrity. And in losing me, he hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost his family, his friends, his reputation, the future he believed was guaranteed. I had walked into the courthouse to escape his trap, but what I walked out with was far greater: dignity, freedom, and a future untainted by his greed. He denied me love, respect, and intimacy. In return, life denied him the security, reputation, and comfort he thought he had secured. Every lie has its reckoning. Every betrayal finds its shadow. And mine? It found me walking away, lighter than I had ever been.